Hello, should we start? Prachi?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Hello?
So start now.
Yeah, we'll start.
Yes.
Uh, can you hear me all? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of ID Mumbai chapter, I welcome you all for our second episode of our Nutribulletin series, celiac disease in nutritional management and medical management too. We have two renowned speakers with us today, Dr. Vaibhav Somani and our very own Shraddha Vijan, who will be taking us through medical management, as well as Shraddha will speak about nutritional management. To read out instructions for the participants. Shruti,
Hello.
hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Hello. Hello.
Ma'am, you're audible.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, so following are the instructions to the participants. So the program is now live on Facebook page and you may invite your friends and
Can you read
family
out
to watch the
instructions, please?
same. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, so hello.
Yes, Shruti, continue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you all need to keep your mic on mute and camera off at all the times. And kindly do not annotate on the screen. Question and answer session will be held at the end of both sessions. And questions can be asked in the chat box towards the end of the session. The speaker will be answering your questions at the end.
Yeah. Thank you, Shruti. So, but before we proceed, I'm very pleased to have Kopika ma'am with us today. So, I request you, ma'am, to say a few words before we commence our today's session. Kopika ma'am, over to you, ma'am.
A very good evening to you all. Om Shri Annapurneshwarya Namaha. Salutations to Devi Annapurneshwari, the goddess of food, as she is the patron deity of all dietitians. Thank you, Safal, Shraddha, Megha, and the entire team for giving me this opportunity to speak a few remarks at the beginning of the session. Friends, you as a registered qualified dietitian, we get two categories of patients or clients who we give gluten-free diets. We advise them. One category is the one because they requires it. The second is by choice, who want to go on a gluten-free diet. Both these clients, their mind, I will say, is annamaya. Why? Because asani, bhojani, shayani, Anna Athave Shana Shani. Throughout the day, they are only thinking of what snacks to eat for breakfast, tea time, munching food in between, what meals at lunch and dinner, what are the items they will have, because it is one menu for all. And this menu has to be modified, one or two items that will suit their requirements. Therefore, it is very important that we have a very compassionate approach to them. It is not only that we list the food of items which they should avoid, but 3 points should be kept in mind. One, that the client and the lady of the house should also be told how recipes can be modified to meet their nutritional requirements. Second, when they take food off the shelf or they order food items, read the ingredients carefully. And third, very important, that when they are invited by somebody's house for food or they go out for a meal, the host or the steward should be informed that what foods they don't eat. Anything that is placed in front of them cannot be consumed to please somebody, because that food will harm them and not Devi Annapurneshwari, she is Annapurne Sadapurne. Nature's bounty has the foods that can nourish gluten-free clients holistically, physical, spiritual, and mental wellness. So, friends, this afternoon session is going to enlighten you all with our very own Dr. Vaibhav Somani and my Shraddha Vijan. You will never regret that the Sunday afternoon time you have taken out a few moments to view and hear these speakers. So, friends, happy viewing and listening, because we have everybody from all over India, from the viewers I can see. So, welcome everybody and all the best.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah. Now we'll start our session. Now I feel really privileged to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Vaibhav Somani. He is consultant gastroenterologist at Bombay Hospital and Medical Research Center. He has vast experience in clinical trials as a co-investigator of phase 2 clinical trials on rivaroxaban drug at Kerala Hospital at New Delhi. Also as a co-investigator in phase 3 clinical trial on hepatitis A vaccine. He is one of the authors in a book on minimal hepatic encephalopathy. He has publications in various national and international journals. He is also awarded Asian Young Endoscopist Award 2017 by Korean Society of Gastroenterology. So I request Dr. Vaibhav Somani to take over. Over to you, Dr. Vaibhav.
So I'll start with I'm going to talk on basics of celiac. I was told the topic is medical management of celiac disease, but I don't think there is much in the medical management of celiac disease. It is all dietary management in the celiac disease, other than the nutritional supplements which we give as a medical therapy. As we know, celiac disease is considered to be very rare in India, but it is not so. Of late, we have been seeing so many cases of celiac disease, and I will, over next 20 minutes, take you through the epidemiology, pathophysiology, clinical presentations, how to diagnose it, and treatment part of the celiac disease. And you can see that over the last 10 to 15 years, the number of celiac diseases in India is gradually increasing, and more so due to better awareness and higher clinical suspicion amongst the clinicians. So celiac disease is a multisystemic immune-mediated inflammatory disease of the small intestine primarily, but it can involve any organ of the body. And it is due to sensitivity to the gluten, which is the wheat protein, and it is seen in genetically predisposed individuals. So it is commonly referred to as celiac sprue or gluten sensitive enteropathy. Sprue in Dutch means aphthous ulcers. So it was in 1888, it was found that patients had a lot of non-healing aphthous ulcers in the mouth, and those were found to have gluten sensitivity. So it is called as celiac sprue. And gluten is, as I said, commonly found protein in the wheat, rye, and barley. So basically, wheat proteins are of 4 types: prolamines, glutamines, gliadins, and albumins. Of those, prolamines in wheat are called as gluten. So this is that's why it is called as gluten sensitive enteropathy. So disease is very common in Finland and Ireland, and also it is seen in North America, where there is a lot of population which has migrated from Europe. So overall prevalence of this condition is 1.4%, and on the basis of serological finding, that is the antibody test which is done on blood, and 0.7% on the basis of endoscopic and biopsy of duodenum. So overall, there is 3 million people in Europe, United States, which is affected with celiac disease. As far as India is concerned, there are not much studies, but there is one good study by Dr. Ramakrishnan et al. From South India. It was a multicentric study where they showed that celiac disease incident prevalence in India is 0.85% in northern India, 0.4% in northeastern, and 0.01% in southern India. So it is commonly said that celiac disease is not seen in southern India because of very low prevalence, and it is sometimes confused with tropical sprue, which is very common in southern India. So when a patient presents with diarrhea in northern India, it is more likely to be celiac disease, and in southern India, it is more likely to be tropical sprue. In fact, it is an irony that wheat is grown and consumed in large quantity in northern India, especially in Punjab, where the incidence of celiac disease is considered to be highest. So the male and females amongst the male and females are more commonly seen to have celiac disease. The age distribution is very widely varied. It can be seen in infants to old age. Almost 60, 70 years age patients are also seen. So there is no as such age limit for diagnosing a celiac disease. So what is the pathogenesis of celiac disease? It results from a combination of immunological and genetic factors. Person who have HLA DQ2 and DQ8 haplotypes, they are more likely to have celiac disease. Almost in our Indian studies, which was done by me and Dr. It was seen that HLA haplotypes were seen in 98% of the celiac patients and only 2% in general population. And even the first degree relatives prevalence is 10%, which is quite.
Hello? Hello? Hello, Dr. Vaibhav?
Hello?
Yeah, now you are, because it was muted.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so when a patient with celiac disease ingests wheat protein like gliadin, then when the food reaches the small intestine where the food is absorbed usually, there is immune mediated reaction. So what happens is when food is absorbed from the duodenum, there is an inflammatory reaction which is generated by the plasma cells, and these plasma cells have these receptors called tissue transglutaminase, anti-endomysial receptors, and deaminated gliadin peptides. These receptors causes secretes T cell response, which causes severe inflammation, causing intraepithelial lymphocytosis, and which leads to villus blunting in severe cases. So due to this villus blunting in the duodenum, the absorption of food is not happening, and that leads to malabsorption, diarrhea, and this nutritional deficiencies in these patients. And this is the reason behind the symptoms, various symptoms, which will be see going further. So what are the symptoms with which patients with celiac disease present? The most common symptom is diarrhea followed by flatulence, borborygmi. Usually it is foul smelling flatulence, and a lot of weight loss is seen in these patients because of multiple factors like chronic diarrhea, anemia, malabsorption, and there is a lot of weakness, fatigue in these patients because of low hemoglobin usually, and even abdominal pain is seen in these patients, but usually abdominal pain is seen in pediatric age group, and it is not very commonly seen in adults. And usually, in fact, what we see in adults is chronic painless diarrhea, which is the most common presentation of celiac disease. If there is severe pain, we usually consider other causes rather than celiac disease. Even the non-specific upper GI symptoms like gas, bloating, chronic acidity, not responding to medicines can be seen in patients with celiac disease. And these are called as atypical presentation of celiac disease. In fact, some of the European studies have shown that atypical presentation is more common than typical presentation in celiac disease. So other than the intestinal involvement, there are a lot of extra-intestinal features which are seen in celiac disease. The most common being anemia. It is usually iron deficiency anemia because of lack of absorption of iron from the duodenum. Other are osteopenia, osteoporosis because of hypocalcemia. Even neurological symptoms like motor, sensory and motor weakness, paresthesias, ataxias are seen in celiac disease. This can be due to nutritional deficiency or due to primary involvement due to celiac disease. Most common skin manifestation which is seen is dermatitis herpetiformis. It is seen in 10 to 20% of the patient with celiac disease. And in fact, some patients who are first present with dermatitis herpetiformis, 95% of them will have celiac disease even if they don't have GI symptoms. So when a patient doesn't have GI symptom but has dermatitis herpetiformis, it is must to screen him or her for celiac disease. Then liver disease like fatty liver, NASH and autoimmune hepatitis are also common in patients with celiac disease. So please add one slide on endocrinal manifestations, which is very important in celiac disease. So hormonal disorders like amenorrhea, delayed menarche, infertility in women, and impotency and infertility in men are very common in patients with celiac disease. Recurrent miscarriages are also common in patients who are undiagnosed or who are diagnosed with celiac disease but not on proper gluten-free diet. Autoimmune thyroid diseases like hypothyroidism and hypothyroidism both are seen in patients with celiac disease. More common is hypothyroidism, and hypothyroidism is seen usually in the form of Graves' disease. Type 1 diabetes is closely linked with celiac disease, and there are a lot of studies which have shown this association, and it is recommended that type 1 diabetes patients should be screened for celiac disease even if they are asymptomatic for it. There is an autoimmune polyglandular syndrome seen in patients with celiac disease, where there is multiple endocrinal disorders like Addison's disease, thyroiditis and ovarian failure. Again, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, which is NASH, is very, very common, and it is one of the endocrinal manifestation of celiac disease. So overall speaking, it is a multi-organ autoimmune disease, and it can involve any organ of the body from head to toe. So this is the our data from Bombay Hospital, which we have diagnosed around 111 patients of celiac disease over the span of last 13 years. And as the data suggests, it is good concordance with the international and this is the symptomatic distribution in our patients. And here we have diarrhea as the most common symptom. Weight loss is second most common. Upper GI symptoms are also very common in patients with celiac disease. Other neurological abnormalities, gynecological abnormalities, endocrinal abnormalities are seen in patients with celiac disease, which our data also is similar to what the international studies have shown. So coming to the diagnosis of celiac disease, how do we diagnose the celiac disease? So there are two main important things. First is serology, and second is endoscopy and biopsy from the duodenum. So serology, there are three serological markers for diagnosing celiac disease: anti-TTG, that is tissue transglutaminase levels; IgA, anti-endomysial antibodies; and anti-gliadin antibodies. So most commonly and most used and most sensitive is anti-TTG levels, tissue transglutaminase levels, which are easily available everywhere, and it can be done at very cheap cost. Then along with it, we need endoscopic and biopsy from duodenum, and histopathological diagnosis of the celiac disease is very important. Only serology cannot help us in diagnosis celiac disease. So this is the ISPAGAN criteria. It is the European Society of Pediatric Gastroenterology criteria which we follow for diagnosing celiac disease. So previously, duodenal biopsy was considered must for diagnosing celiac disease. But nowadays, especially in pediatric age group, even we can diagnose celiac disease without duodenal biopsy. So we can avoid endoscopy in these pediatric age group patients. But then these patients need to have anti-TTG levels more than 10 times the upper limit of normal, positive anti-endomysial antibody, and positive HLA-DQ2 and DQ8 haplotype, all three with presence of gluten-dependent symptoms, are must to diagnose celiac disease in pediatric age group without duodenal biopsy. And in adult age group, in adult patients with duodenal biopsy is must for diagnosing celiac disease. First is gluten-dependent symptoms, celiac disease antibody levels, and HLA-DQ2, DQ8 haplotypes. We don't do it in all patients. Where we have confirmed diagnosis with biopsy and serology, we don't need to do HLA-DQ2 and DQ8, and if patient is symptomatic. So this ISPECN criteria have scores, and if score is more than 4, then it is considered to be the confirmed diagnosis. Other than these tests, there are some other tests which are needed to along with them to see the malabsorption, not for diagnosis of celiac disease, but to see for other features, anemia, thyroiditis, and so all routine tests have to be done for electrolyte levels, liver function test, stool test. This has to be done along with the diagnostic test which we discussed earlier. Serum IgA antibodies are must whenever we do IgA anti-TTG, IgA antibodies along with that has to be done, because some patients have immunodeficiency syndrome. So if IgA antibodies are low, then automatically IgA TTG levels will be negative even if patients have celiac disease. So in such cases, we do IgG anti-TTG antibodies rather than IgA levels. So this is the endoscopic picture of a normal small intestine and patient with celiac disease. It is very commonly seen and easily seen in today's high definition endoscopes. You can see the serrations seen which are not there in normal small intestine. This is the second part of duodenum which is showing serrated folds, serrated duodenal folds. So from diagnosis, we come to the management of celiac disease. So as we all know, removal of gluten from the diet is the most important and essential part of the treatment of the celiac disease. We do not have currently any drug in the clinical practice which can be used for treatment of celiac disease. Whatever medicines are there, they are all under trials. In fact, it is very difficult to put patient on complete gluten-free diet. It is very important to explain them the proper gluten-free diet, which you all do better than us. And a small percentage of patients with celiac disease sometimes fail to respond to gluten-free diet. So there are multiple causes behind it. First is we have to look that there is no inadvertent gluten going on with the diet. Then second possibility is refractory celiac disease. Refractory celiac disease is when after 6 weeks of gluten-free diet, patient is still having symptoms and villus blunting in duodenal biopsy. So in these patients, corticosteroids can be helpful. And even if patient doesn't respond to corticosteroids, we have to rule out small intestinal lymphomas, which is a very known complication, well-known complication of the celiac disease. So what are the elements in the management of patient with celiac disease? First is consultation with a skilled dietitian, education about the disease. This is the most important aspect, the education about the disease, because most of the layperson, they don't know that something called as celiac disease exists. So they have to be made understand the what is happening, what is gluten sensitivity, what is gluten. In fact, what I have done in clinical practice is we have formed WhatsApp groups of the celiac disease patients. So we enroll the new patients in them, in these groups, and other patients help them to understand. They tell their stories where they have improved after gluten-free diet. So that helps them in getting mentally prepared to live on gluten-free diet for lifelong, especially in young young people and children whom it is difficult to avoid chocolates and cakes. So these groups really help, and especially when patients shares their own feedback, it is very helpful. And they have to explain about the long-term follow-up, a regular follow-up with the multidisciplinary team. So after starting on gluten-free diet, if patient does not respond, then what is non-responsive celiac disease? As I said earlier, first and foremost is to make the correct diagnosis, then to look for any inadvertent gluten exposure. So even beer, some of the medicines, toothpaste, these are the some of the factors which have gluten, and we cannot understand that patient is taking those, and that's why he or she is getting exposed to the gluten and not responding to the gluten-free diet. So these things have to be kept in mind. So after confirming the strict adherence to the gluten-free diet, if still patient has symptoms, then we have to rule out other disorders which can be seen along with celiac disease and can have similar symptoms, which are irritable bowel syndrome, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, pancreatic exocrine insufficiency, microscopic colitis, and other food intolerances like lactose or fructose intolerance. And last is obviously, as I said, refractory celiac disease if patient is not responding after 6 weeks of gluten-free diet. So how do we diagnose, and I'll show you in the flow chart. If patient is diagnosed to have celiac disease and have persistent or recurrent symptoms, we again test TTG levels and duodenal biopsy. If both are positive, then we refer to a dietitian again to confirm the adherence to the gluten-free diet. If TTG is negative and villus atrophy is not seen, then we rule out other causes of diarrhea or other clinical manifestations. And patients who are already on strict gluten-free diet and not responding, then we look for lymphoma and other complications of the celiac disease. So there are a lot of drugs which are in trial for the celiac disease. These are which act as different levels. All are in, some are in preclinical phase 1 and phase 2 trials, but none of them has come to the market yet. So it's a long list, and but it's very difficult to say when will we have a drug which will help in celiac disease, and patients can have gluten after taking these medications. So regarding morbidity and mortality in patients with celiac disease, it is rarely lethal. Usually celiac disease have very good prognosis, and those who are diagnosed early and given proper nutritional supplements. Patients with celiac disease are at increased risk of various malignancies, especially of the intestinal tract, and most common is lymphomas. In patients with untreated celiac disease who are pregnant, recurrent miscarriage and risk of having congenital malformation is high. So as I said, the prognosis is very good in celiac disease if diagnosed and treated early. The prognosis in patients with celiac disease who are not responding to gluten or who have refractory celiac disease is, and not responding to corticosteroid is generally very poor. So overall, celiac disease is a very common disorder these days. It is diagnosed very frequently because of high clinical suspicion, and it is easy to treat once you explain the patient about the importance of gluten-free diet, because we don't have any medicines available. But what is more important is look for other extra-intestinal manifestations, nutritional deficiency, and treat them early so that patient can live a normal life. Usually once we start gluten-free diet, patient's clinical symptoms improves within 2 weeks. And the duodenal biopsy after gluten-free diet becomes normal in almost 2 years. So some of the patients take time to respond to gluten-free diet. So they should be explained about keeping the strict adherence to gluten-free diet, because sometimes it takes weeks to months to respond and for the clinical symptoms to go away. So with this, I'll end my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vaibhav. It was very enlightening talk, and really you explained a very nice, simple way about all pathophysiology of the celiac disease. Now I'll request you to stay with us the session. So I'm sure many of them having some questions for you. So we'll take these questions together. Is it okay with you, sir?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm here to hear Shraddha.
Hello? Megha, can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah,
ma'am, we can hear you.
Yeah, introduce this.
So our very next speaker, I welcome Shraddha Vijan, who will be speaking on nutritional management in celiac disease. Shraddha is a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes educator. She is working as a senior dietitian in Bombay Hospital, and she is an LEC member with IDA Mumbai chapter. She's also JET and NET and JRF qualified. She is also involved in various education programs and has been in keen interest in research. I request Shraddha to kindly take over.
Thank you so much, Megha. Okay, first I'll just share my screen. Is my PPT visible?
Yes, it's visible. You can go ahead.
Okay. So thank you, Megha, for this warm welcome, and hello everyone. I would like to thank IDA Mumbai chapter for giving me this opportunity to speak on the topic of nutritional management of celiac disease. As Sir also started his talk with saying this, that the only management which is available right now for celiac disease is a lifelong adherence to a gluten-free diet. So let's start with the session by knowing what exactly is gluten and what are the sources of gluten, which will help you to plan out diets which are gluten free. Okay. So gluten, it's a group of proteins which are prolamines and glutenins. The prolamine factor which is present in wheat is known as gliadin, in barley is hordenins, and in rye it's secalins. Now these the sources of gluten in our day-to-day diets, which is wheat and wheat products, maida products, bakery products, dalia, rava, sevai, couscous, bulgur wheats. All of these are different sources of gluten from wheat. Then we have rye, barley, oats. Actually, pure oats is gluten free, but at various stages of oats, which is passed through, there is a very high chances of cross contamination. That's why in a typical gluten free diet, we do not include oats. But yes, if you have access to a certified gluten free oats, you can include it in the patient's diet, but you need to introduce it with caution and you need to monitor if they are showing any symptoms after consumption of oats. Apart from this, there are other sources which is also known as like hidden sources of gluten, which can be dextrins, malts, beers, brewers, yeast, soya sauce, hing. Now, if you might be wondering that only a pinch of hing will do what, then in the subsequent slides, you will actually see what is the safety cutoff of gluten, which is very, very meager. So that's why hing is something which is very commonly used in our Indian diets, and you need to be careful that these are not consumed in a gluten-free diet. Baking powders, packaged products, processed meats, also many times the coatings which are pre-coated meats, or for the coating they sometimes use maida or breadcrumbs also. So you need to be careful even of that. Meat is allowed, but if it is a processed meat or marinated, then it is not allowed, because you need to check what is the source of marination also. Then there are non-food sources of gluten also. That is, many of these medications which will have the excipients, in which there can be starches which are used, which can have a base of wheat. Also different supplements, nutritional supplements, herbal supplements can also have any gluten present in that. Cosmetics, and if it's a child, you need to be careful about the Play-Doh which they are using. They can also be a source of gluten. Now, as Sir has also already mentioned that they need to adhere to a gluten-free diet, and it's very important that the patient need to be referred to a registered dietitian who can assess the patient well and also educate them about the disease as well as about the gluten-free diet that they need to follow. You need to test and treat the micronutrient deficiencies. Now this particular slide already Sir had covered, so I'll just rush through it. Again, it just mentions that there has to be a need of a dietitian involved who will educate the patient well, and also they have to be a group, and a lifelong follow-up sessions is also extremely important to know whether they are following up and whether there's no contamination that is happening and their symptoms are improving. So again, it's the importance of education, motivation, and follow-ups. I always feel that as a role of a nutritionist or a dietitian, We might plan the best diets on paper, but if we are unable to educate and to pass on that information to the patient, probably that beautiful diet on the paper has no value. So always remember that along with the planning, your counseling also is very important. You need to spend a lot of time with the patient so that they understand what is the disease, why they have to be put on a gluten-free diet, what exactly is the gluten-free diet, and how well they can manage their life along with this. So as spoken earlier about the extraintestinal manifestation also, there have been a lot of studies which have shown that when these patients who are having these manifestations, they're put on a gluten-free diet, many of their problems, they actually start resolving. In one of this study, it has shown that almost 60% of children and adults were having extraintestinal manifestation like short stature, fatigue, iron deficiency, anemia, etc. And when they were put on a gluten-free diet, it was seen that the children had a faster and a higher rates of symptom resolution when they were compared to adults. And if in case, as sir has also already mentioned, that if it is not improving, something like short stature was not improving in 28% of the children, then you need to investigate for comorbidities also. Other studies have also shown that there is, after starting a GFT, there was rapid catch-up growth, normalization of a pituitary function in hypoparathyroidism. They showed that it helped improve the calcium regulation as well. So when your patient comes to you and who has been recently detected as a celiac disease, the first thing as a dietitian you will be doing is the assessment. I'm sure everybody out there who are listening all know what is the ABCD of the assessment. A is your anthropometry, B is your biochemical parameters, C is the clinical parameters, and D is the dietary assessment. These are the four main pillars that you need to do for your assessment. Along with that, you need to even check what is the socio-economic status, what is the educational background, because you need to know how much that patient or the person would be able to understand what you're saying and would be able to do it. Then is the access of different resources. You cannot write a gluten-free product if you know that the person cannot afford it or does not have an access to that product. And last and very important is your family support, because this is a major difference in the diet from as when you compare it with the other family members. Hence, the family support is extremely important. So once we come to the planning the diet for gluten-free, what is important is to know that you need to balance the diet. Okay, it's just that the gluten from the cereal has to be replaced with the non-gluten options, but the rest of the fruits, vegetables, milk products, poultry, oils, all of that can be included in the diet because they do not have gluten. Check for the cross-contamination and then plan out a balanced diet. Now, there was a lot of studies which are of Western data because mainly the studies are conducted in the European nations. They have seen that in the GFD diets, the people who were consuming that, they had higher intake of fat, lower intake of fiber and carbs, and there was no much difference seen in the protein intake. Actually, I've seen a lot of studies which have actually shown the higher intake of fat. What you will see is in the Western world, there's a lot of packet gluten-free products which are available and those people consume that. But in an Indian scenario, we have so many gluten-free options available in our own diet. It's locally grown that we do not need to worry so much on the packaged products. So that's why always keep this mind and these things in your mind and then plan your diet. So the RDA, always go by your RDA. Whoever the person is or the patient is, if it's a child or an adult, go as per the RDA for the energy, macro as well as micronutrients. As I said, you need to balance out the other food ingredients in their diet as well. If the patient is coming with a weight loss, then yes, the caloric and the protein intake can be increased in order to balance out and help them recover from that. And as sir has already mentioned that the symptoms start to improve within 2 weeks, but for the entire gut to resolve, come back to its normal state, it can take about 6 months to even 2 years. So you need to be careful that the absorption power is still compromised. So your diet has to be balanced and it has to have all your nutrients. including your micronutrients. Because these patients actually, because of the malabsorption, have lower levels of iron, B12, D, calcium, magnesium, folic acid, zinc, copper, dietary fiber. Even in children diet, they have seen that they have low folic acid, magnesium, and selenium levels. So what you have to do is, once you find out that these patients are deficient, very, very important thing is you need to rectify it by giving them supplementation. Do not wait, because your diet will be providing all these nutrients, but if there is a gross deficiency, then it needs to be corrected with a proper supplementation. Then what they can eat, obviously you need to give them more options, because you cannot just give them a list of no's. You need to even give them that what can they eat for those options as well. We have a lot of options available in India, which is Rajgira, Makai, Jowar, Bajra, Nachni, rice. Even if your patients can actually afford these also, they can go in for cassava flour, banana flour, almond flour as well in their diets. You can include any of these and plan your GFDs. Okay, so how much gluten is safe? Now what is seen is the gluten intake, this thing is very variable, and it is also dose dependent. You can have somebody with a celiac disease who can even tolerate 50 milligrams of gluten. Somebody can tolerate 100, but somebody might not even tolerate 10 milligrams of gluten as well. So it's extremely variable. There were a lot of studies which have shown this thing. One of the studies I have just mentioned, in which they have seen that less than 10 milligrams is unlikely to cause any significant histological abnormalities. So with the safety cutoff standards which are given internationally by Codex also and the EU, they have said that 20 ppm or 20 milligram per kg of the product of gluten is safe. That's the safety cutoff. In some of the nations, they have gone as low as 3 ppm also. But in an Indian scenario, the safety cutoff which is given by the Food Safety and Standard Regulation, it is again less than 20 milligrams per kg. You need to know this thing is the labeling. Now it is given by the FSSAI, that is the gluten-free label. It has to be printed to the immediate proximity of the name of the product. So if you're going out and seeing a product which they are claiming to be gluten-free, but if this thing is not mentioned on their label, you know that whether this product is truly gluten-free or no. So this helps you to read the labels well also and teach your patients also. So since this is a gut related disorder, so the gut dysbiosis is also very important. If you go and read a lot of articles, you will come across this name, that is zonulin. So basically it regulates the permeability of the intestine. When its level increases, there is an increased intestinal permeability also. And it has been seen that the microbes as well as gliadin, they can upregulate the expression of zonulin, and it will also release pro-inflammatory cytokines. So there has been an association seen between CD and the microbiome composition. Now what is affecting what? There is no clarity on it, whether the microbiome composition has changed due to CD, or because of the changed microbiome, it triggers CD in some of the patients. You cannot pinpoint in any one of them. Also, even if there is an unintentional intake of gluten, will also cause inflammation. Intestinal microbiome balance is not restored even after being on a gluten-free diet. There is an increase in the number of the bad microbes and the lower numbers of the good microbes, like the bacteriocytes are increased by the bifidobacterium levels or species are decreased, and they might remain unchanged even after putting the patient on a gluten-free diet. Also, they have checked for feeding type during the infancy stage also and seen whether breastfeeding can actually change your microbiome. Yes, it does, but associating it with CD, as I said earlier, you can associate it, but what is causing what, you cannot pinpoint it out. But definitely breastfeeding has a lot of the other important factors also involved with it. The next is there any role of these? There's a lot of studies that have been conducted on probiotics, the role of prebiotics, fermented foods. They have seen that when you introduce prebiotics, we all know that what is the role of the short chain fatty acids. It's like a food for the gut. for the colon also. So in these cases, what is important to know is, because all of these are on the trial stages and they require actually a lot of human studies also. So nothing concrete has come out of it. Because this is also related with an increased oxidative stress to the body, and it can cause even gene changes in the gene expression. It has been seen that there is an increased reactive oxygen species, decrease in the antioxidant defenses, which can lead to the inflammation and oxidative stress. There's also an induces the transcription of pro-inflammatory cytokines, inducible nitric oxide synthase. These levels have, or they were increased in patients who were left untreated, the celiac patients, and they were only partially corrected when they were put on a gluten-free diet. Also, high levels of NO were found in serum and urine of children with celiac disease, which correlated with an increased expression of the INS again. So when first thing that comes to our mind when we hear about the oxidative stress is the antioxidants. Yes, they have a role in decreasing the inflammatory mediator production. They reduce the damage due to the oxidants, promotes gut barrier functions, also the inflammatory responses. Again, a lot of antioxidants, they have these products, they have their role of antioxidants like vitamin C, E, lycopene, flavonoids like epigallocatechin gallate, genistein, myrcetin, quercetin, omega-3 fatty acids. Always remember that your diet has to be balanced. There is no one food product which will have only one nutrient. The one food product will be rich in one nutrient but will have other nutrients as well. So don't go behind only one nutrient. Always balance your diet and give it. So as sir has also gone through this part is, if there is no improvement, the patient has come, you have given them a gluten-free diet, but there is no improvement seen. So either they can have non-responsive CD or they can have refractory CD. So first thing that you need to do is you need to check for any cross-contamination, whether is there any cross-contamination that is happening with their diet. So what you will do is you need to recheck all the labels. You need to contact the manufacturers if they are consuming a packet product which shows that this product has been manufactured in a unit which is using even wheat in this production. Go back to the manufacturers and check with them that actually there is any contamination from their side. You need to check for the medications, what medicines they are taking, any religious foods, extremely important. Bhagwan ka prasad hai, thoda sa le lo, but you need to know that what exactly are they consuming. Is it that rava ka shira or that wheat ka shira or some other gluten containing food that they might be consuming? Check for those also. Dining away from home, if they are consuming oats, is it a certified gluten-free oats? Also, if there are any sources of cross-contamination that might be happening at home, like they might be using the same utensils, they might not be cleaning the counter properly, or not by, or there's something known as double dipping. In our Indian scenario, we all have that masala box at home. So that same chammach is used to put all that masalas. So you need to check whether that same spoon or that same masala box is also used by them also. So this can also be a source of cross contamination. The next is, after that is, you need to put them on an elimination diet to see these factors when they eliminate out from your diet, whether it's helping them or no. So basically this particular diet is designed to eliminate any possible sources of gluten, to delineate patients with true refractory and non-responsive, and also to remove any gluten contamination from the diet. There is always an indication of use for these because it's a highly restrictive diet. So you cannot use it for all the patients. There are certain conditions that you need to take care. One is you can use it only when there's a confirmed diagnosis. It has to be given to patients who have already finished 12 months of a gluten-free diet. So your patient comes to you after 3 months of GFD also is not showing any improvement. You check for the contamination, but you will not put them directly on the elimination diet. You have to wait for 12 months to do that. Third is there has to be a dietitian involved, then only you can start with this diet. Fourth is there need to be a proper education, support and a follow-up because it takes about 3 months to do this. You cannot use it when there is no confirmed diagnosis, if the patient is having non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and if the patient has not finished that 12 months of your GFD. So it is done in 2 phases. So this is the phase 1 that I have mentioned. In this phase, fruits and vegetables, all fresh fruits and vegetables. In grains, they have included only rice. Proteins, because it's a Western data, so they have included the fresh fish, seafoods, eggs, chicken and turkey. Fresh fruit and vegetable juices can be included, and seasonings as well. So this is your phase 1 that it needs to go for about 1 to 2 weeks. After that, you need to come on your phase 2. Now in the phase 2, it goes 3 weeks and above. You will gradually introduce newer food items in this, and they need to be included in every 2 to 3 days. How for young children, we need to start introducing one new food, and keeping a gap. The same way you need to introduce this in the phase 2. And if you see that phase 1 plus these food items, which is including dairy. So in the phase 2, you will be including all the dairy products. In grains, again, it's a Western data. That's why beans are mentioned. Proteins, in this case, even nuts can be included. And the addition to the seasoning would be sugar. So what is important is it's recommended that it has to be implemented for 3 months and under a strict supervision only of a dietitian. The effectiveness of this diet is checked with repeating the celiac serology and the esophagogastroduodenoscopy. You need to reintroduce. Now this is an elimination diet of phase 2. After that, you need to reintroduce other food items also that are allowed in a GFD diet. So you will do that over a period of 2 weeks, and you will be keeping on checking the individual tolerances. Then you will re-evaluate. Once the person is on a typical gluten-free diet, you wait for 3 to 6 months, re-evaluate and see whether they are tolerating well and they are in the remission stage. Even after this, they are not tolerating or they are showing symptoms, you know that probably they can be in a refractory CD cases also. I've included one of the slides of non-celiac gluten sensitivity as well. Since we are bombarded with a lot of queries from so many patients that, I'm gluten intolerant, I'm not able to tolerate. There might be patients who might just psychologically feel that they are gluten intolerant, but some of them might actually not be tolerating it also. So in this phase, your assessment is extremely important. And also many people have this IBS sort of symptoms, and if you have made changes into their diet and if it's improving, good. But many of the studies have shown that when you introduce dietary changes in these people, they might be put them on a low FODMAP diet also, on a gluten-free diet also. So you really don't know what exactly is working. So you need to be extremely you need to know your patient well, their symptoms well, and then take a call on what will work for them. But one caution that you need to keep in mind is that if the patient is coming to you with the typical symptoms or atypical symptoms of celiac disease, or if you're not very sure, do not start them on a gluten-free diet. You need to refer them to a gastroenterologist, because if they are undiagnosed CD and if you put them on a gluten-free diet for a couple of months and then they go to a doctor, it might show a false negative test also. So that's why if you are in a doubt, always refer them to a gastroenterologist so that they can see whether they are having any IBS or celiac disease or any other GI related condition as well. Disadvantages of gluten-free diet is it definitely has a negative impact on the quality of life if not done properly. Psychological problems, they will always be in a fear that there can be some chances of cross contamination. So as a nutritionist, you need to make them understand that what can be the sources of cross contamination, so that once they have the education and that power, they are less anxious and they will be able to do it well. Also, they will have possible vitamin and mineral deficiencies that you need to correct with supplementation. There is an increased cardiovascular risk as well as metas risk as seen in the Western data when they had higher fat intake. But in an Indian scenario, if you're planning the diets well, then I don't think this should be any problem. You can manage it very well. There can be severe constipation also. Sometimes these patients have the IBS sort of symptoms in which you would want to restrict down on the fiber. I'm saying restricting the fiber and not completely putting them on a fiber-free diet. So in this scenario, again, you need to see that how much of fiber restriction you're doing. If it's too much, then definitely it can also bounce back as a constipation in these patients. So always remember that do not send out your patient from your consultation room without actually giving them the counseling tips and a pamphlet or the paper that they can carry back home of these these items as well. That is, one is to mill their flowers at home, so there is no chance of only cross contamination. Second is make them and educate them and explain it to them the importance of reading the food labels. They should not read for the words only like wheat and maida. They can be hidden words also like plain, refined, enriched, bleached, all purpose flours also. Teach them that these all words are also gluten ka different names, wheat ka different names. So teach them all of this. Third is wheat free does not mean gluten free, because there's rye and barley also. There's rye breads also which are very easily available nowadays. So you need to tell them that there is a difference. Make them use separate utensils, clean all the surfaces. They need to separate, store and prepare and package their different products. Check for hidden sources of gluten and also give them more food option and recipes. When you give them more and more options, it would be easier for them to follow this kind of a diet, because you need to remember it's a lifelong dietary change. So the more you make it easier for them, the better they are going to follow it. So one thing always remember, I tell this to all my patients of celiac diseases also, and apart from that, other patients as well sometimes, that if you are in doubt, avoid that product. There are further reads. If anyone is interested to go back and want to read these articles, they are good. You can read them and get more information also about it. With this, I would just want to say thank you for your gutsy listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shraddha. It was a very enlightening and informative session. You have covered almost everything in a very short span of time. I think a lot of information is there regarding celiac disease and the nutrition, not pertaining to the local foods that is available. So your presentation, I think it was more focused on the local food and the local diet, so that all the dietitians out there can actually suggest to their patients. So thank you very much for this. So I think without any delay, we'll take up question and answer session. So there are few questions. I'll just start.
Hello. Yeah, till Megha, you search this question. Can I ask a question to Dr. Vaibhav Somani? Yeah, yes, sir. I would like to ask one thing. What is a refractive celiac disease? Can you explain, please?
So refractory
Yeah.
celiac disease is defined as a confirmed celiac disease with villus atrophy, not respond to gluten-free diet for 6 weeks, strict gluten-free diet for 6 weeks. If it doesn't respond and still villus atrophy is there after 6 weeks of gluten-free diet, then it is refractory celiac disease.
Yeah, thank you. And one more thing, as we all know that intestinal biopsy is a really gold standard investigation. So is any specific part of the duodenum which is from the biopsy?
So the recommendation is we take 6 biopsy samples from the duodenal, second part of duodenum, and 4 from second part of duodenum and 2 from the duodenal bulb or first part of duodenum.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Thank you. Great.
This has to be done. If the biopsies are not adequate, you cannot make proper diagnosis.
Yeah, I mean, I heard
there was a new terminology coined some 1 or 2 years back, which was told as short segment celiac disease. Okay, so what happened was that previously duodenal biopsy was taken only from D2. There was biopsy from bulb was not taken by some people. So these patients were not diagnosed as celiac disease. And then this study was done where they showed that if you take bulb biopsies, then additional celiac disease were diagnosed whose duodenal second part was normal. So this is only, their celiac disease was involving only the first part of duodenum, initial. So it is very important to take those biopsies also.
Yeah, I asked because I read somewhere that on distal duodenum part only gives a positive, good, exact result. In other parts, it won't. That's why I asked you
Yeah.
ki whether it's specific.
So at least 6 biopsies are must.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir. Megha, you have any questions?
Yeah, so there's one question for Dr. Vaibhav. So in spite of wheat being our local and a staple food for India, why there is celiac disease? Why the celiac disease is so common in India?
So that's the irony, as I said. Punjab has the highest wheat production and highest wheat consumption, but it is most common in northern India. It is most common. So there is no reason behind it. Probably it is something to do with the genetics. Okay. So there has to be population-based studies where HLA haplotypes are seen in this population. Then only we can come to this conclusion. But we don't have such studies which are done in India, so we can't comment on that. Why is there is no answer for why?
There's one more question for you. One of the participants, she's suffering from celiac disease, and the symptoms that only symptom that she has is low HB. She's been trying to conceive since a year now, and she's already consulted her gynecologist, and they said there is no problem in conceiving. So, what is your take on this?
So, no, if she is having persistently low HB even after being on gluten-free diet, then there has to be some other cause, or there is some inadvertent gluten cross-contamination. Okay, so we have to rule those out, because once you are on gluten-free diet, you are given iron supplements, folic acid, B12 supplements, then your hemoglobin should be normal. Okay, at least about 10 for a female. So if that is there, then there is no problem in conceiving. But if your HB is persistently low, she can conceive, but there will be complications. So better to get her HB levels up, then conceive. And we have to find why the HB levels are low. Okay.
There's one more question. There's there are many fad diets that are there currently. So for weight loss also, many people say that gluten-free diet is good for weight loss. So what is your take on that?
So 20% of the American population is consuming gluten-free diet on the self-recommendation because they feel that it is helpful in weight reduction. But there are no studies to prove it. Okay, yes, it will decrease your carbohydrate consumption, so it will definitely help with weight reduction, because it's not only gluten. Anyways, if you reduce your carbohydrate consumption, some weight reduction you will achieve with it. So that way it will help, but I don't recommend gluten-free diet for weight reduction.
Specifically for weight
Yeah.
loss. Okay. Safal ma'am, do you have any questions? Ma'am, you are on mute.
Hello. Yeah. Shraddha, there is one question for you.
Yes.
Your presentation was really wonderful. You have taken us through all the minute points in detail. You have covered very nicely. There is one question for you: is what are the challenges while following gluten-free diet, and how to address them?
Okay, so the main challenge that you might face with a gluten-free diet is the problem of cross-contamination. So even if you are following up and you have prescribed the diet and given it to them, very important is to know there has to be proper follow-ups with them. Tell them to maintain a food diary. Always keep on checking that whether, unknowingly if there are no gluten that is entering into the diet. So that is the main thing, is the cross contamination and the hidden gluten. So for this, the main part or the main treatment line from a nutritionist point of view is you need to educate the patient really very well, and you need to give them lot of material so that they have more options. They would know that what can be the hidden sources, what can be the chances of the cross contamination, and that way only you will be able to achieve. Also, how sir had also the previous question to sir about that iron, also in that same thing, it's very important that she might be following a proper gluten free diet, but unknowingly there might be some hidden gluten or the cross contamination that might be coming in. That's a problem. And the second issue is the micronutrient deficiencies. You always need to address this and you need to supplement it, because as I said earlier also, it takes about almost a longer period of time for the entire normal functioning to take place from the gut. So these are the two main things: the cross contamination and the hidden gluten, and treating all the micronutrient deficiencies.
If the patient is having any extra intestinal symptoms, conditions also, then will the dietary management will change?
Okay, for the extra intestinal
Hello,
manifestations,
can you hear me?
yeah, I could hear you, ma'am. So for the extraintestinal manifestations, so majorly it has been seen that once you put the patient on a gluten-free diet, most of their symptoms will automatically resolve on their own. Except for if the patient is having type 1 diabetes, then yes, you need to follow the protocol of the dietary management for type 1 as well, along with the gluten-free diet. But apart from that, on the other conditions, generally you need to, even if you follow with a gluten-free diet, many of those symptoms will resolve on their own.
I would like to add something here,
Yes,
if
sir.
I may, please.
Definitely,
So
sir.
for especially for thyroid disorders, hypothyroidism and all, you need to give a medical line of treatment for thyroxine supplements. For hyperthyroidism, the same these are drugs for hyperthyroidism, even propranolol for controlling their heartbeat and all needs to be given, which is normal standard treatment for non-celiac thyroid problems. Those all has to be followed in these cases when there is celiac disease, along with the gluten-free diet, of course.
So there's one more question for Dr. Vaibhav. Um, so if the patient is just gluten sensitive and is not intolerant or kind of scenario, how much gluten should be restricted and for how long?
So just gluten sensitive but not gluten intolerant. I didn't understand what it means. It is either celiac disease or not.
Crohn's.
So
Yeah.
you have to make a clear diagnosis first and then treat accordingly. So then what I think what the person wants to ask is, it's a non-celiac gluten sensitivity basically. That he feels better when they don't eat gluten, and but there is no as such celiac disease. So this is a known entity, and gluten-free diet is recommended for non-celiac gluten sensitivity.
There is one more question, Dr. Weber, for you, sir. How does one differentiate between celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivity?
So celiac disease, there is serology positive. Duodenal biopsy will show villus atrophy intraepithelial lymphocytes, which is Mars staging we use in that. Mars stage 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Modified Mars staging is the latest. And we apply the Ispagen score. If it is more than 4, it confirms the diagnosis of celiac disease. While in non-celiac gluten sensitivity, serology won't be positive. Very clear. Duodenal biopsy would be normal, but patients will having symptoms similar to celiac disease, which is responding to gluten-free diet. But serology and biopsy would be normal. So that is non-celiac gluten sensitivity. It is a clinical diagnosis basically. You rule out celiac disease and still patient is feeling better after taking gluten-free diet. It is likely to be some IBS or non-celiac gluten sensitivity.
Thank you.
Hello, Safal, can I ask one question, please?
Yeah, yes, sure.
Yeah. So, Shraddha, just for the sake of our young dietitians who are part of the crowd, I want to ask you, if your patient is type 1 diabetes and with celiac disease, what kind of challenges do you face to, in terms of counseling the patient? Because there is this standard understanding that once you have diabetes, then you have to stop your rice. But here you have another challenge that your patient is also having celiac disease. So how do you counsel in that case?
Okay. Uh, Thank you, ma'am, for this question. So definitely, as I also said, that counseling is extremely important. When you are counseling young children, they might not really understand the gravity of the situation. So it's very important to counsel the parents and the other family members, because they would be the food providers for the children. And the type of changes that you make in terms of your cereals are extremely important. So a gluten-free diet does not mean that you need to include only rice. You have many other cereals options which are also available, and they are very nutrient rich as well. So you need to plan out your diets with that. What is extremely important is you need to give them takeaway messages, like how they need to manage their food when they are going out, especially when they're going to school. You need to tell the school people how we say for a type 1 diabetic that they might be using the insulin in the school, or they might have to consume the foods on time, they cannot have long breaks. In the similar way, you need to counsel and you need to inform even the school authorities about the gluten status as well. And you need to always be very cool, patiently explain in a very childish way. If you're explaining a child that these are the food items that you need to avoid, especially if they are going to be taking it from somebody else's tiffin. And also, when you're going out, you need to be sure that you either carry their food from home, or you pick up things which are gluten free, and you know that they are going to be safe, they would not be cross contaminated. So your main thing would be counseling the parents, the family members, and giving out takeaway messages, pamphlets to them, so that they know what are the sources, what are the cross contamination places also. And then gradually, with every session, you keep on counseling the child as well, little by little. You cannot bombard them with a lot of information, but you cannot make them very anxious also, because a dual problem of type 1 diabetes as well as of celiac disease can actually make the parents more anxious than the children. So you need to explain it to them really well, is because when they are understood properly, then the child will also automatically start following that changes in the diet also. And it would be advisable if they can make the gluten free changes in the whole family, so that there is no chance of cross contamination even at home.
Thank you. Basically, the message to the crowd is that even if you are not consuming wheat, we are blessed with so many other millets, and that confidence you need to give to the parents and show them different recipes which can be used to, still make that very tasty and healthy, because ultimately you are dealing with a child. Thank you. It was a nice answer, Shraddha.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Shraddha, one more question for you. As you know, many times we see that people use this gluten-free diet for weight loss, right? So even if the person is not showing any GI disturbances, discomfort, still they go on gluten-free diet. What's your comment on it, Henny?
I just want to point out one thing is, many times these people don't refer to any dietitian and they go on a gluten-free diet on their own. It might not be actually a gluten-free diet also. It might just be an avoidance of wheat. They might still be going out and consuming a piece of pizza and say that they are on a gluten-free diet. So definitely, in terms of the weight, I personally have not seen. Also, there are not much of a data which is also available where they have seen that it's a positive effect of putting a person on a gluten-free diet with no GI related disorders or any problems. So why to unnecessarily put a person on a gluten-free diet? That's what I feel. But if the patient or the person is insisting, then yes, you can just replace their gluten-containing cereal with some other cereal options. But you need to just make them understand that you cannot be extremely severe with your intake. Otherwise, you might have a lot of other deficiencies which are related with a gluten-free, actual gluten-free diet also. So that's how you need to counsel them and make them understand, because 50 years of their life they might be consuming gluten and they are okay, and suddenly the next year they feel that they are not they are intolerant and not having any other issues. As also sir had also said that the prevalence would just be in one digit figure, but the people following gluten free diet is actually in the two digit figures. So it's just that the mindset has changed. You, and as a role of a nutritionist, I think it's our thing also to make them aware that this is something which is not beneficial for them, and we have other options also for weight reduction which we can adhere to.
Yes, you are very rightly you said, because there are so many, we are blessed with so many whole grain cereals with us in India. So definitely we can use, and there is no need to have gluten free specifically. But they, of course, they can have other modifications in the diet and definitely go
Absolutely.
further. Yeah, yeah. There's one more question for you. So that lactose-free diet is also suggested many times. People, the symptoms are so overlapping that they feel the lactose-free diet also is required, and additional it will give a effect along with gluten-free diet for celiac. So, as a patient, somebody having this typical of celiac symptoms, then do you think it is really required? How you will explain such patients about it?
Okay,
Because
so ma'am, in the initial phase when the patient comes to you and the patient is having a lot of diarrhea, in that
yes,
particular scenario, yes, you would want to look into putting them on a lactose-free diet for a short period of time, and then gradually reintroduce the lactose into their diet to see if it's helping them or no. As a initial phase, yes, you can put them on a lactose-free or a lactose-restricted diet, and also take care about their fiber intake and how we'll normally be managing the diarrhea. In that similar format, the lactose plays a role even in these cases, but a lifelong adherence to a lactose free diet is not required, because many of these patients very well can tolerate lactose also, probably not in the initial phase, but later after a couple of weeks or after a couple of months you can gradually reintroduce all your lactose containing food products into their diet, and they would very well tolerate it also. It is all depending upon the tolerance. There might be one patient who might tolerate milk 2 cups in a day also. There might be a patient who might not even take 2 teaspoons in their tea also. So it's completely variable, and your assessment plays an important role, that how well you're assessing the patient and how you're introducing food items into their diet. But as an initial phase, yes, you can put them on a lactose free diet to see whether the symptoms are resolving and helping, it's helping them.
yeah, and you rightly said, because sometimes even we have seen experience with patients are really diagnosed as a celiac disease, and when we are putting on a gluten-free diet and with other well-balanced diet with micro and micronutrients all considered, and then they are really the symptoms are reduced much a lot, and they improve with weight and diet everywhere. Like there's no need of specifically lactose-free diet as such. You can give in different forms. Sometimes psychology also works. You know
Correct.
yeah, and
Right.
they feel that at first, because everyone thinks that then the idea is that it's a lactose
Yes,
related and
yes,
they explain,
yes.
and it really yeah,
Similar problem occurs with the Crohn's disease patients who have diarrhea.
yes,
So when
yes,
we start treatment, we tell them to avoid milk products and milk. But we know that it is not lactose intolerant. So
yeah,
once the diarrhea subsides, we start it so they can tolerate it.
yeah, right, very right. Megha, you have any questions with you? Hello.
No
Yeah.
questions, ma'am. We are
Yeah,
done.
there are two questions in this board. The one is asking to Shraddha, there are reliable brands of offering gluten-free products. You have any idea about it?
Okay, so for this, I would really not want to name any brands as such on a public platform. You can always DM me and I can get back to you about it. But yes, there are products which are genuinely gluten-free, which are available into the market. And once you do a proper market survey also, it will be helpful. But you can definitely DM me, because naming any particular brand, it's not advisable on this platform. But there are many which are available.
And one more question to you. What about hybrids like critical or Comet? You have any comment on it?
Okay, so when even I had read about the different studies in which they have shown that even the hybrids also need to be restricted, because you really do not know what is the gluten, how much is the gluten content. And as we have seen that the safety standard cutoffs for gluten is very less. So even if it's a hybrid and it does have a small amount of gluten, it can still trigger those reactions in the person. So I would want to not want to introduce even hybrid grains into the person of on a GFD.
Thank you, Shraddha. There's one last question to Dr. Vaibhav. As you are there in many of the clinical drug trials, is there any newer drugs, in this initial stages, which shows any promising results for the treatment of celiac disease?
Yeah. So Lerazotide is a drug which has shown promising results, and hopefully, if the phase 4 trials go good, phase 3, 4 trials, then it should be in market after that. But it will take time, at least 2-3 years minimum. Lerazotide is the name.
Okay, yeah, great.
So I would like to make one comment here, where
Yes.
regarding the strict gluten consumption, one most important thing is what obviously we send to dietitians, but the most important what we tell them is use a grinding machine separately for your grains. Don't use packed grinded flour, or you grind it outside in a common machine. You use at home a portable machine they can bring and use it. I think that helps wonders.
Yeah, definitely. Is also my experience, because many times they mail outside, and it's a major source of cross contamination, and it is a bad this thing impact on the. It's really true that they need to take this at home.
And regarding these patients who have diabetes, celiac, it is very difficult. We have, Shraddha must have seen, even Kopima madam must have seen, we have patients who have cirrhosis, who have celiac disease, who have diabetes, who have hypertension. So it is practically like stopping everything. So this kind of patients, it is very difficult to explain about gluten-free diet, because they are already cirrhotic, they have ascites. We are telling them not to eat salt, diabetes hai, sugar bhi mat khao. So then they are like, what is the point of living then if you are not allowing me to eat anything? So these kind of patients, and we have a publication where we have seen 6 cirrhotic patients who have responded after gluten-free diet. Their ascites has gone, their transplant, they have delisted from transplant list, they have improved. So it really helps, but it is very, very difficult to convince this patient to take strict gluten-free diet, not eat, control sugars, control salt. It is very difficult.
Yes, but I feel when along with gluten free diet, when we are giving to such patients, when we are handling the, when we are giving balanced food with a good, especially proteins, there is no need of lactose free, no. So then when we are giving all
Yeah.
BCA sources through curd and skim milk and other fruits, vegetables, other things, and even whole grain cereals are there, except gluten. So definitely we can take care of these patients very positively. We can
The patient
according to
realizes
their
this
getting glucose, yeah.
once he sees improvement, patient is very happy. And once he or she
Yeah,
is motivated that yes, I
yeah,
am
we have to
feeling
motivate.
better, then we don't need to explain them. Then they will do very
Yeah, yes,
stringently.
yeah, yeah, right. Uh, so
Ma'am,
any
there is
questions
one
now, Megha?
question that I could see on the chat box. I would just want to take that question. There was a little
Yes,
confusion
yes.
that the cutoff for the gluten is less than 20 milligram per kg of the food product.
Food
It's
product.
not the per kg of the body weight.
Body weight.
We go by food products.
Yeah, it's a very important thing.
Yeah,
Because sometimes they might get confused with that.
confused with the
Yes,
per kg of the weight.
yes.
We are
Uh,
done with the questions,
yeah,
Safal ma'am, from
okay.
you also and from Zoom as well.
Yeah, so our yeah, really wonderful overall session. Thank you, Dr. Vaibhav, for and Shraddha. It was really great session. You almost covered very nicely each and every minute top details of celiac. Now, lastly, I would request our co-convener of IDA Mumbai chapter, Jayashree Paranske, to say give vote of thanks. Over to you, Jayashree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, from IDA Mumbai chapter, we would like to place our gratitude to you, Dr. Vaibhav Somani. It was pleasure having you here. This is such a difficult topic actually, and the whole idea is these things get discussed in the conference rooms, but the idea of holding this Nutri Bulletin, as we like to call it, is that this message should reach masses, and that's why we have we are having these videos on our YouTube channel as well, because it is needed for the masses to know more about it. And that's why we wanted to give that, a doctor's perspective as well as a dietitian's perspective. So that was an whole idea. And you did a wonderful job in a very simple manner. You explained everything about celiac disease, and from IDA Mumbai chapter, we place our thank you on record. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Also, I would like to say thank you to Gaurpriya ma'am, some of our other seniors whom I have seen on the in the gallery, Dr. Sheetal Mamunkar, Madhu Sharma ma'am from IDA, and Ipsita ma'am. So thank you very much for attending IDA Mumbai chapter program. I would also like to say thank you to Shraddha. It was a wonderful presentation. And as Sapal said, you managed to cover all the aspects. It was a difficult topic, certainly, but in a simple manner, even for all the dietitians who are there in the group, you managed to show them that how you can make it easy and simple for the patients, and at the same time look into all the aspects of celiac disease management. So once again, and last but not the least, my dear friend Sapal Mahadik and Megha Terse, the new entrant in IDA. It was a wonderful, wonderful program, and you thought of a very relevant topic and which is not normally covered in all these conferences or chats. So once again, thank you so much from IDA Mumbai chapter, and stay tuned. And this is for others. We are coming up with new and more relevant and educational programs from IDA Mumbai chapter. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Before we end the session, I would like to make a small announcement for the participants. We will email you the feedback forms, and there will be a small quiz in it for those who secure 80% will receive certificate within 5 working days, and feedback form will be available for 24 hours. Okay, so I request all the participants to kindly fill the feedback form so that we can improvise during our next session, and stay tuned with Nutri Bulletin series. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It was very good, Safal and team. Very good.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.